October 3, 1943, 30,000 feet over the North Sea. Cold metal from a 50 cali. Browning pressed into a waist gunner's cheek as he watched a Messerschmitt Bf 109 slice through the formation, about 200 yards out. His fingers trembled on the trigger, not from fear but from what he was about to do. Everything in him said aim straight and fire. The German fighter closed fast on the beam, a perfect 90-degree deflection shot. He could see the black crosses on the wings, the flash from the 109's guns, the canopy glinting. Every instinct told him to place the reticle on the enemy's nose and squeeze. Instead, he aimed 6 aircraft lengths behind it. The 50 roared. 2 seconds later, the Messerschmitt blew apart in a ball of orange flame. That gunner had demonstrated a rule that ran counter to common sense. When firing from a moving bomber at an attacking fighter, aiming directly at the target almost guaranteed a miss. The trick to survival was aiming where the target had been. This counterintuitive method, position firing, turned American aerial gunners from panicked men spraying bullets into the sky into precision shooters who could down enemy planes with startling efficiency. But the path to that insight began 3 years earlier, in a dusty Nevada desert with men who didn't know they were about to rewrite aerial combat. January 25, 1941, Las Vegas, Nevada. Near freezing air met 60 square miles of nothing. Creosote bushes, jackrabbits, and endless sand under a pale winter sky. Colonel Martinez Steneth stepped out of his car and surveyed the emptiness. He'd been told this wasteland would become the most important gunnery school in American military history. The problem was stark. The U.S. Army Air Corps had 0 specialized facilities to train aerial gunners. No schools for shooting from moving aircraft at moving targets. No standardized curriculum. No proven method to turn farm boys and factory workers into men who could defend billion-dollar bombers and their crews from fighters closing at 300 mm. The stakes were simple and terrifying. Without trained gunners, the American strategic bombing campaign could collapse before it began. Heavy bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator carried as many as 13 50 caliber machine guns for defense. Those weapons were useless if the men manning them didn't know how to use them. In January 1941, they didn't. The British had learned this the hard way. RAF bomber crews flying night raids over Germany were being picked off by Luftwaffe fighters. British gunners, trained mostly on ground targets and static drills, were unprepared for 3-dimensional aerial combat. They aimed the way instinct told them to, directly at attacking fighters, and they missed. They died. The U.S. military was determined not to repeat that disaster. On January 25, 1941, the Army Air Corps leased 60,000 acres of Nevada desert from Las Vegas for $1 a year. Construction crews moved in by March. Barracks, classrooms, hangars, and firing ranges rose where nothing had stood. By June 17th, 103 instructors had reported, men who now had to figure out how to teach a skill nobody in America truly understood. The order came fast. On December 9, 1941, 2 days after Pearl Harbor, the Chief of the Air Corps ordered immediate aerial gunner training. The base officially activated on December 20th. Within weeks, the first students started arriving at Las Vegas Army Airfield. The war had begun, and America badly needed trained aerial gunners. Training started on solid ground. Instructors mounted shotguns on fixed platforms with limited arcs, and students shot at clay pigeons tossed into the air at different angles. The idea worked. Skeet shooting taught the basics of leading a moving target, aiming ahead so your shot and the target meet at the same point. Most students hit their targets. They were learning deflection shooting, the age-old technique hunters used for centuries. If a duck flies left to right, aim ahead of it so the pellets and duck arrive together. Simple physics, intuitive and natural. Then instructors put the shotguns on the backs of moving trucks. Everything changed. As trucks rolled through the desert, students found targets they should have hit slipping past untouched. Clay pigeons that should have been easy shots sailed by. Confusion spread. These men were shooting exactly as taught, leading targets and aiming ahead. Why the misses? The answer lay in a counterintuitive principle even seasoned instructors found hard to explain. When you stand still and shoot at a moving target, you aim ahead. But when you're moving and shooting at a moving target, the rules flip. Sergeant Robert Hayes, an instructor from Texas with a physics background, drew a simple diagram for his baffled class. A bomber at 300 mph, a fighter attacking from the side at roughly the same speed, and a bullet fired from the bomber. Students assumed the bullet flew straight from the gun to where they aimed. They were wrong. The bullet inherited the bomber's forward velocity the instant it left the barrel. Every round fired from a moving plane was already traveling forward with the bomber, in addition to whatever force the gun gave it. That meant a bullet fired directly to the side didn't go purely sideways. It went diagonally, carried forward by the bomber's motion even as it moved away from the gun. The faster the bomber, the more pronounced the effect. At 300 mph, a bullet fired at 90 degrees to the side would curve forward dramatically, like a baseball curveball but far more extreme. Hayes grabbed a length of string and a weight and walked forward while letting it swing. The students watched as the weight didn't hang straight down. It angled back, pulled by forward motion. Release it and it doesn't drop straight down. It carries forward with you. Bullets behave the same way. The implications were enormous. If a German fighter attacked directly from the beam and a gunner aimed right at it, the bullet would curve forward and pass harmlessly ahead. The bomber's own speed guaranteed the miss. To hit a target to the side, you had to aim behind it, sometimes far behind. How far depended on attack angle, aircraft speeds, and distance. But the principle was constant and completely at odds with human instinct. The British had learned this principle through brutal trial and error over the skies of Europe. They developed what became known as the zone system, dividing the defensive area around a bomber into sectors, each requiring its own aiming technique. The Americans adopted and refined this idea, eventually creating their own version called position firing. Position firing came from a simple but crucial observation. Attacking fighters always followed curved pursuit paths to keep their fixed guns aimed at bombers. From the gunner's view, the fighter seemed to drift sideways toward the bomber's tail while growing larger as it closed in. This movement created a predictable geometric relationship that could be measured. By calculating the fighter's angle to the bomber's axis, along with the relative speeds and bullet velocity, instructors could determine exactly where gunners needed to aim. The U.S. Army Air Forces turned this theory into a training system using tables, charts, and a practical rule set based on radians of deflection, an angular measure showing how far behind the attacking fighter to fire. At a 90-degree attack angle with standard speeds, a gunner might need to aim 8 to 12 radians, or about 8 to 12 aircraft lengths, behind the enemy. Every instinct said this was madness, but math and physics proved otherwise. By summer 1942, Las Vegas Army Airfield was producing 600 trained gunners every 5 weeks. The program had evolved into a 6-week course that stripped away old habits and rebuilt instincts around position firing. Week 1 focused on ground school, ballistics, aircraft identification, and hands-on familiarity with the .50 caliber Browning. Students learned to field strip and reassemble the weapon blindfolded to prepare for real combat conditions, inside cramped, freezing gun positions. Week 2 introduced shotgun trucks. Students rode in moving vehicles firing at clay pigeons launched at different angles. As truck speeds increased, they had to aim farther and farther behind their targets to score hits. Week 3 involved manipulation trainers, mock turrets mounted on towers up to 40 feet tall. Students practiced tracking dummy fighters pulled on wires through the air, learning to compensate for their bomber's motion. Week 4 was the Waller gunnery trainer, a dark room with projected images of attacking fighters on a huge curved screen. Trainees fired at the images and the simulator tracked every hit and miss. It could recreate any attack angle or speed, allowing students to instantly review their performance and improve. Week 5 moved the training into the sky. Students climbed aboard real B-17s and B-24s, firing color-coded ammunition at fabric sleeves towed behind aircraft. After each flight, instructors examined the targets to count hits and provide immediate feedback. Week 6 covered advanced firing drills and final exams. Students faced simulated multi-angle attacks, emergency procedures, and proficiency tests in every gun position. About 20% washed out. The rest earned their silver wings and joined bomber crews across the country. By July 1943, 7 U.S. gunnery schools had produced nearly 20,000 graduates. By the end of the year, over 57,000 gunners had completed training, Las Vegas alone turning out 600 every 5 weeks. The system was running at full speed, but effectiveness would be proven only in combat. August 17, 1943, 27,000 feet above Germany. 376 B-17 bombers from the U.S. 8th Air Force roared toward Schweinfurt and Regensburg, deep inside the Reich. Their mission? crippled Germany's ball-bearing factories and Messerschmitt assembly plants vital to its aircraft production. The Luftwaffe was ready. More than 400 German fighters rose to intercept. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, and twin-engine Me-110s armed with rockets. The sky erupted into chaos. The Germans used new tactics. Head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high, low 6 o'clock runs beneath the bombers' tails, and rocket strikes from beyond machine gun range. It became a massacre. The Americans lost 60 bombers, 20% of the attacking force. The losses were devastating, sparking debate over whether daylight bombing could continue without fighter escorts. But the Germans were stunned too. They hadn't expected significant resistance, yet about 27 of their fighters were confirmed shot down, not hundreds as first claimed, but still far more than expected. The reason was clear. American gunners trained in position firing could now hit targets with precision. Waist gunners across the formation applied what they had drilled endlessly in Nevada. A fighter attacking from 3 o'clock level at 300 yards, apply 12 radians of deflection, aim between the fighter and the bomber's tail, fire in short bursts. Observe the rounds hitting the wing root and engine. The fighter breaks off, trailing smoke, and dives away. It worked exactly as the physics predicted. Still, every gunner felt the same instinctive urge to aim straight at the enemy. Only rigorous training allowed them to override that impulse and fire correctly under pressure. Without it, they would have missed entirely. That was the true lesson of Schweinfurt. Position firing wasn't natural. It had to be trained into muscle memory. The men who'd spent weeks shooting from moving platforms and simulators had learned to fight their instincts. They aimed behind when every fiber of their bodies told them to aim ahead. And that training, born in the desert outside Las Vegas, was what kept bombers and the men inside them alive. The Germans discovered that tightly packed bomber formations with well-trained gunners were far more dangerous than they'd expected. Single fighter attacks, even from good angles, carried real risk. The Americans learned a harsher lesson. Despite improved gunnery, daylight bombing without fighter escort remained unsustainable. Yet the Schweinfurt raid also proved one thing: position firing worked. Gunners who applied the correct deflection could hit fast, maneuvering fighters in 3 dimensions. The next question was how to boost their effectiveness even more. The answer came from an unlikely source, Britain. In late 1943, RAF night fighters began using a breakthrough device, the Mk2 gyro gun sight. This marvel used a spinning gyroscope, mirrors, and math to compute the proper lead for any attack angle automatically. The pilot put a moving reticle on the target, and the sight did the rest. The U.S. Army Air Forces saw the potential immediately. If a gyro sight could solve deflection for fighters, could the same idea be adapted for bomber turrets? In November 1943, American engineers began adapting British gyro technology for turret use. The result: the K-14 sight for fighters and adapted versions for bomber turrets. These sights used a dual reticle system. One fixed reticle showing where the guns pointed, and a gyro-controlled reticle showing where the bullets would actually travel, factoring in aircraft motion and ballistics. In level flight, both reticles lined up. The moment a gunner tracked a target, the gyro reticle moved to show the correct lead. The gunner only had to keep the moving reticle on the enemy. The sight handled the math. Fitting gyro sights to bomber turrets wasn't easy. They were bulky, complex, and required the gunner to set the target's wingspan to estimate range. In the chaos of combat, with attacks from multiple directions, dialing in wingspan and adjusting controls could be impractical. Still, gyro sights were a major step forward. Tests in early 1944 showed gunners using gyros roughly doubled their hit rates compared with standard ring and bead sights, even when both crews knew position firing. The automated calculations freed gunners from memorizing radian charts and angular rules. By summer 1944, many bombers carried compensating sights, simpler automated systems that adjusted aiming points based on turret position, airspeed, and altitude. Gunners set speed and altitude once, then tracked the target while the sight adjusted the aim. The difference was dramatic. Aircraft fitted with advanced sights and crews trained in position firing began downing attackers at ranges and angles once thought impossible. Combat reports recorded clear improvements. Crews that had struggled with basic sights were now shooting down enemy planes within weeks of receiving compensating equipment. By late 1944, the USAAF had refined training from 2 years of combat experience. The 6-week course expanded to include advanced gunnery control and strict fire discipline to avoid hitting friendly fighters, deeper study of enemy attack patterns, emergency procedures for jammed guns or damaged turrets, and casualty response. One training innovation stood out: Operation Pinball. Las Vegas Army Airfield received 7 modified Bell P-63 King Cobras called pinballs. These aircraft were armored with thick duralumin plating and carried electronic sensors and a bright red light in the propeller spinner. Students fired frangible ammunition, rounds made of compressed lead and plastic that shattered on any hard surface. When a frangible round struck a pinball, sensors tripped and the red light flashed. Pinball pilots flew real attack profiles, diving and weaving exactly like German and Japanese fighters, so trainees tracked live, unpredictable maneuvers rather than steady fabric sleeves. The results were striking. Trainees who practiced against pinballs posted 30 to 40% better hit rates in combat than those who trained only with towed targets. By early 1945, the pinball program had been rolled out to all 7 AAF gunnery schools. Combat data confirmed the trend. As more bombers received advanced sights and more gunners completed improved training, defensive fire became measurably more effective. Intelligence reports showed a steady rise in German fighters attributed to bomber gunners from mid-1943 through the end of the war. These figures are complicated by the arrival of long-range escorts. The P-51 Mustang could escort formations to Berlin by early 1944, changing the air war dramatically, but the core finding remained. Bombers with trained crews and modern sights shot down roughly twice as many attacking fighters as those with untrained crews and basic sights. The 2x gain came from better position firing training, improved sighting gear, smarter tactics, and disciplined fire control. At the heart of it all was that counterintuitive lesson learned in the Nevada desert. The Pacific Theater posed different challenges. Japanese fighters like the Zero and the Oscar relied on extreme maneuverability, rather than armor and heavy firepower. They attacked from steeper angles, made tighter turns, and often closed to point-blank range using agility to evade defensive fire. American gunners adapted position firing techniques to meet those tactics. Late in 1944, the B-29 Superfortress, which operated largely in the Pacific, introduced a revolutionary remote control gun system. Gunners sat in pressurized compartments and used periscopic sights linked to electronic fire control systems. These systems automatically calculated deflection from target range, angle, and relative speeds. In the vast skies over Japan, this mix of better training, advanced sights, and automated fire control helped American bomber crews meet a very different kind of aerial threat. Central Fire Control gunners on B-29s described the system's effectiveness in post-war interviews. Japanese fighters would come in fast, usually from below, trying to get under the formation. Gunners would acquire the target in their sights. The computer would calculate range and deflection, and they would fire. The turrets swung automatically, barrels elevated or depressed on their own. All the gunner had to do was keep the sight on target and squeeze the trigger. The speeds were too high, and the attack angles too complex for manual calculation. The automated system made defensive gunnery possible against Japan's fastest fighters. The B-29 Central Fire Control System represented the ultimate evolution of position firing technology. Human gunners provided target acquisition and tracking. Computers handled all the ballistics, deflection, bullet drop, even wind drift. The combination proved devastatingly effective. When the war ended in August 1945, the Army Air Forces had graduated over 214,000 aerial gunners from 7 specialized gunnery schools. Las Vegas alone had trained more than 44,000 through August 1944. These men learned to override their instincts, to trust mathematics and physics over intuition, to let their bomber's own velocity carry bullets into enemy aircraft. The statistical impact was difficult to quantify precisely. Combat claims were often inflated, with multiple gunners firing at the same target and each claiming the kill. Gun camera footage was limited, and German and Japanese loss records were incomplete or destroyed. Yet the data that survived told a clear story. Properly trained American bomber gunners achieved legitimate kill rates roughly double those of untrained crews using identical equipment. This improvement came almost entirely from mastering position firing principles. It didn't make gunners superhuman, but it made them competent. And in aerial combat, competence meant survival. The lessons learned in World War II shaped aerial warfare for decades. Korean War B-29 gunners used refined versions of the same techniques against Soviet-built MiG-15s. jet aircraft with enormous performance advantages over propeller-driven bombers. Yet the same physics still applied. Even modern fighter aircraft rely on the same principle. Advanced computing gun sights calculate deflection automatically, but the mathematics is timeless. A projectile fired from a moving aircraft inherits that aircraft's velocity. To hit a target, a pilot must account for both motions. The Nevada desert that once hosted Las Vegas Army Airfield is now Nellis Air Force Base, home of the U.S. Air Force Fighter Weapons School and the Thunderbirds demonstration team. The old gunnery ranges are gone, replaced by modern training grounds, but the truth discovered there in December 1941 remains engraved in American doctrine. When you're standing still, aim ahead of a moving target. When you're moving, aim behind. Physics doesn't care what feels natural, it only cares what works. The German Luftwaffe never fully adopted position firing principles for its bomber gunners. Training emphasized individual marksmanship and relied on veterans to pass along experience. When those veterans were lost, effectiveness collapsed. Japanese training faced similar limits, informal, inconsistent, and never codified into doctrine. The British, who had pioneered many of the underlying concepts, shifted to night bombing, where radar and electronic warfare replaced visual gunnery. Only the United States combined systematic position firing instruction, advanced sighting technology, and mass production training, creating bomber crews who could defend themselves even without escort, though escort remained preferable. The shift from instinctive aiming to mathematical position firing marked a turning point in human skill development. For thousands of years, warriors had aimed directly at what they wished to hit, but high-speed aerial combat defied intuition. Trainees had to accept that aiming a dozen aircraft lengths behind an attacker could produce a hit, a profound act of cognitive retraining. That mental transformation was the true triumph of America's aerial gunnery schools, not just their simulators, not their desert ranges, but their ability to rewire instinct itself. The legacy of those programs extends far beyond World War II. The methodical breakdown of complex skills, the use of repetition to override instinct, and the fusion of human judgment with technology all became cornerstones of modern military and technical training. Today's fighter pilots, drone operators, and even guided weapon systems follow the same logic first mastered over Nevada's sands: motion, deflection, and trust in physics. By 1945, the United States had built not just the most effective aerial gunnery system in history, but a new way of teaching precision, a discipline born from one counterintuitive truth. In motion, what feels wrong is often exactly right. When attacking fighters appeared at 3 o'clock, screaming in at 300 miles per hour, trained gunners didn't aim where the fighters were, or even where they were going. They aimed where they had been, trusting that their bomber's own speed would carry the bullets forward into the enemy's path. They ignored instinct and followed the math. The gunnery schools closed in September 1945 as the war ended and demobilization began. The Las Vegas facilities transitioned to new purposes, eventually becoming Nellis Air Force Base. The instructors returned to civilian life carrying the memory of teaching an impossible skill. Their students scattered across the country, forever changed by what they'd learned. But the lesson remained, etched into doctrine and preserved in manuals that would shape aerial combat for generations. The lesson that survival sometimes means doing what feels completely wrong. Mathematical precision could defeat natural instinct. Proper training could rewire the brain to perform complex calculations faster than conscious thought. American bomber gunners learned to account for motion, to aim behind, and in mastering that single counterintuitive truth, they helped win the most destructive war in history. The story of position firing is, at its core, about human adaptability, about the ability to learn skills that defy instinct, and the power of systematic training to transform ordinary people into specialists, capable of extraordinary precision under impossible conditions. It's a story of physics and mathematics, but it's also one of trust. Trust in instructors who taught what felt wrong, trust in equipment that handled what the human mind couldn't, and trust in training strong enough to override millions of years of instinct. That trust was earned in the skies over Europe and the Pacific, where trained gunners brought down enemy fighters that would have otherwise destroyed their crews, where understanding deflection meant survival. The Nevada desert that once forged this transformation is now home to the most advanced combat aviation training in the world. The Thunderbirds perform maneuvers that would have seemed impossible to those 1942 trainees. And the fighter weapons school teaches tactics that once bordered on science fiction. Yet the same principle endures. Motion affects trajectory, speed changes everything. And sometimes hitting your target means aiming where it isn't. Trusting mathematics to unite bullet and target somewhere in the future. American aerial gunners learned that truth the hard way. Through relentless training in the Nevada desert and brutal proof over Europe and the Pacific, they learned to override instinct, to trust the process, and by mastering that one paradoxical law, they became the most effective bomber gunners of World War II, not because of better weapons or faster planes, but because they understood physics and had the discipline to apply it, even when every instinct screamed otherwise. Physics doesn't care what feels natural, it only cares what works. And in the skies of World War II, what worked was position firing, the counterintuitive truth that saved thousands of lives and helped win a war.